thank you very much for joining us on The Way today.
It's a pleasure.
In your latest book, Triple Jeopardy, you speak about the three greatest threats to the UK, which you believe are aggressive secularism, radical Islam, and lastly, multiculturalism. So we'll just concentrate on multiculturalism and extreme secularism to begin with. Do you believe that multiculturalism has deteriorated the Judeo-Christian principles that this country was founded on?
Yes, I think it's actually the other way around, that multiculturalism was invented because the Judeo-Christian tradition of this country, which we obtained from the Bible, of course, was already losing ground in the public sphere. So instead of welcoming the new diversity in Britain, for instance, on the basis of Christian hospitality, Christian engagement, Christian service, something had to be invented. And that was multiculturalism, which was really based not on hospitality and engagement and service, but on things like tolerance, mere tolerance, which involves, as you know, leaving people alone. And that led to isolated communities, segregated communities, and all the problems that emerged from that.
And has multiculturalism actually caused Britain to lose its identity?
Yes, again, it's chicken and egg here. I mean, I think it may well be that Britain was already losing its identity and invented multiculturalism because it was losing its identity. However, the two are related. Cause and effect you can argue about.
You mention in your book how multiculturalism and aggressive secularism have caused a moral vacuum in society. Do you believe that we are in danger of radical Islam and other ideologies filling that void?
Well, that is one of the main reasons for the warning, that if you create a vacuum, something fills it. And secularism, whilst it has restricted and sometimes emptied the public space of Christian beliefs and Christian values, it's generally not put anything in their place. So there is a vacuum. And of course, we must be concerned. I mean, for the first time since the demise of Marxism, we are facing a new comprehensive social, economic and political ideology, and that is radical Islamism. That is not to do with the faith of ordinary Muslims, which we should respect, and Muslims whom we should love, but this is a comprehensive ideology, and of course we must be concerned that in this situation of vacuum it will have an effect.
Bishop Michael, has the Church taken a back seat to all of this over the past few years, decades even? Have they not stood up for their beliefs? And perhaps is that the situation why we're having Sharia law infiltrated as much as it is today?
Yes, I mean, to some extent, the churches have not been allowed a place in the public sphere. Where they have been allowed, it's been on condition that they don't make any trouble. So if you speak your mind, if you say what the Bible teaches, if you say what is good for the country and for its people on the basis of biblical teaching, then that is very often something people are not willing to hear. So it's not entirely the fault of the churches. But yes, I think the churches have also, because of this climate, adjusted themselves, accommodated themselves, whatever word you want to use, and not been as clear as they should have been.
Now in Acts, we see how Paul refused to obey the authorities at the time. He thought it better to obey God rather than man. Do you think we should be taking a lead from this?
Yes, what the New Testament teaches in particular is that we should obey the rulers who have been placed over us by God.
Yes.
I mean, that's the default position. We should pay our taxes, we should honor the king, we should obey our rulers because they also are God's ministers for the sake of justice. I mean, that's the teaching in Romans 13, for example. But the question is, what happens when the ruler is not doing God's will? And in the New Testament, you see a gradual move from seeing secular authorities as benevolent, as part of God's provision for human well-being, to being the great beast of the book of the Revelation.
Yes.
So there is the possibility that God's provision for a just ordering of society can go wrong. And what happens then? So what I tend to say is, of course, Christians have the duty to obey their rulers, except when they command something, command us to do something that God forbids, or they forbid us from doing something that God commands. And then we have to answer with Peter and the apostles, we must obey God rather than men.
Thank you, Bishop. Now we'll move on to the Islamification of the UK. And in your book, Triple Jeopardy, you make mention of this as one of the greatest threats to the UK. Now, you've spoken very passionately about this over time and continue to do so. Why is this issue so close to your heart?
Well, because I have personal experience of a number of societies in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, in Iran, in the Middle East, in many places, and indeed beyond the Middle East. I've just come back from Nigeria, where previously open and tolerant societies have been closed down by the influence and the activity of radical Islamism.
Yes.
Now, this has also affected Muslims, of course. At one time in Pakistan, when I was working there, we worked very closely with largely Muslim women's groups who were apprehensive that the imposition of Sharia would restrict them in their professions in terms of educational opportunity and so on.
Yeah.
So I have seen this happen again and again, and indeed it's happening all over the world today. When I said and did these things in Pakistan many years ago, I came to be in danger, and danger even of life and for family. And that is one of the reasons why I found myself here. So it was a great surprise to me that what had happened to me in Pakistan all those years ago was now happening here. I mean, I had the same threats because of this resistance to this ideology that is affecting the freedom of so many people. Now, how did that happen? You know, I think the British people have to ask themselves how such a situation could arise in a place like Britain with its commitment to freedom. So that's the background to my concern.
Now, we have spoken to Baroness Cox about the discrimination that Sharia law brings to particularly women.
Yes.
Do you think the government is taking the infiltration of Sharia law in the UK seriously?
Well, you'll have to ask the government, but what I've done with Caroline Cox is to have briefed MPs and peers about her bill and the background to her bill. The fact of the matter is that the Western public law tradition, as it has emerged under the inspiration of the Bible, is based on equality, the equality of all before the law. Even Muslim scholars will tell you that Sharia is based on three basic inequalities. So the first is between Muslim and non-Muslim. I mean, a non-Muslim can never be the equal of a Muslim under Sharia in all sorts of ways, in terms of marriage, inheritance, where they can live, what job they can do, and so on. Secondly, the inequality between women and men. And thirdly, it used to be the inequality between slave and free. So if you then say, as prominent church people and judges and others have said that Sharia law ought to be recognized in some way in this country, what you are doing is introducing a contradiction in the body of the law. One of the examples that was often given of soft Sharia that might be recognized in public law in this country was that of Sharia family law. And I said at the time, okay, let's take that as an example. At the moment, anyway, bigamy is a crime in this country. If Sharia law is recognized in some way, will it continue to be a crime, and will it continue to be a crime only for some and not for others? So, you immediately compromise the equality of all before the law. Secondly, in divorce proceedings, unfortunate and tragic as they are, the parties in a court in this country will be treated equally, man and woman. But that is not so under Sharia law. Whatever the provisions for a woman obtaining a divorce, the provisions for a man are entirely different and privilege the man. Custody of children. At the same time as the highest law officers in this country were saying that Sharia family law should be recognized in this country, the law lords were having one of their last sittings, because they've now become the Supreme Court. And the custom used to be, when they were the law lords, that a bishop sat with them when they were pronouncing on appeals in the House of Lords, and because I was on duty at that time, I was sitting with them. When they pronounced on the appeal of a Lebanese woman, I think it was, against deportation, and they upheld her appeal because they said if she was deported to the Lebanon, her son would be taken from her and given to her husband under Sharia law, and this would be a violation of her fundamental rights. Well, absolutely. But at the same time, the highest law officers were saying, let's recognize Sharia family law. Which way do you go? The laws of inheritance are discriminatory, both for women and for non-Muslims. I mean, a non-Muslim cannot inherit from a Muslim, for example. So what I'm saying is that even in this narrow area, fundamental principles of the Western public law tradition are compromised.
Now, with the way the situation is right now in the UK, are we seeing an inequality emerging in favour of Muslims as opposed to Christians? Are we seeing that happen?
Well, it was a judge, wasn't it, recently, who did something that prevented someone from speaking freely in a particular situation, where he said that Muslims would be offended. So he was asked, would you say the same thing if Christians were offended? And he said no, because offending Christians does not create a law and order situation. Now, I mean, I can see the way his thinking is going, but in effect it results in discrimination. This is also the case with people around the table, places around the table, that attention is given to people who may be exposed to radical Islamism in a way that it is not given to Christians or even to people of other faiths. I mean, Hindus and Sikhs often say, why is so much attention being given to a particular community? With Christians, I mean, I remember ringing the a leader of a local authority because I discovered that on his consultative council he had people from every faith except Christians. So I rang him and I said, what's wrong with Christians? And he said, it never crossed my mind that Christians should be included. So it's in these practical ways, but I think that sometimes anyway there is a something further back. There is a worldview question further back in this, which is that those who are promoting secularism in the public square know that Christianity is the only serious rival in terms of worldview to them. So they can have people of other faiths as allies, even sometimes if it suits them, but their target is the Christian faith.
So we've spoken a bit about the dangers of Sharia law, the inequalities that Sharia law could bring to the UK. I have to ask at this point what the agenda is of radical Islam, and what would the UK look like 20 years from now in the face of that?
Well, and that has to be answered in the context of what the world will look like, because the UK is not, well, it is an island, but you know what I mean. We live in a world that is interconnected. Radical Islamism is not caused by grievances. Let's be clear about that. Grievances help it in its recruitment and in its profile, possibly. It is not caused by injustice, though injustice may help in some ways. It's not caused by poverty, though again poverty may help. The agenda of radical Islamism in its Sunni form is quite specific. It is the restoration of the caliphate that was abolished after the Allied victory after the First World War. And throughout, since then, that has been one of the aims, is to restore a universal caliphate, because Sunni Islam, according to these people, depends on it. Secondly, it's the universality of the Islamic Ummah, or people. So the nation state, even an Islamic state, can only be a temporary provision. In the end, the aim is the unity of all Muslim people. And that's the reason why you get people born in this country going over to Syria to fight with radical Islamist groups, at the moment aided by our own governments, I have to say, but that era will be discovered in due course. Thirdly, it is the implementation of Sharia as understood by radical Islamists in all its aspects. And that, of course, leads immediately to the way in which non-Muslims are to be treated. So in the proposed constitution for Egypt, Christians and Jews are recognized as being able to have some religious identity, but no one else is recognized at all. You can't be an atheist or a Baha'i or whatever, because that is how Sharia deals with the matter. You know, this is not just something they've plucked out of thin air, but it has emerged out of what Sharia actually demands. And then the last thing is the recovery of lands lost to Islam. So which are they? The Iberian Peninsula, for example, or India. And the real issue for radical Islamists in the Holy Land is not the injustice that is done to the Palestinians, though of course injustice has been done to the Palestinians. It is really the fact that here is a land that was conquered by Muslims, by Islam, and is now lost to Islam. So that's the framework in which this whole thing operates. Shia Islamism has another, somewhat different agenda.
And in wake of all of this, what can the church do? I mean, for site visitors who will be watching the program, and we've spoke a bit about the dangers of everything, and in your book you go into greater detail. But what can the church do in the face of all of this?
I think awareness is very important, because one of the problems has been that people have simply not been aware of what is going on. So to make people aware, to awaken their consciousness and their conscience is part of the task. Obviously, when questions arise, for instance, about Baroness Cox's bill, in a democracy, people can do a great deal in terms of contacting their members of parliament, of making sure that this question is addressed in parliament, to make sure that policing is effective in this country, in every part of this country, not just parts that we feel comfortable with.
Yes, yes.
That people have access to the courts.
Yes.
That no one, whatever their religion, should be prevented from access to the freedom provided by the laws of this land, and that can be where a situation where freedom is denied can be remedied by the courts. I mean, everyone must feel that they can avail of
they
this.
can access that,
Yes.
yes.
Even in the local communities, there are many things that can be done. I mean, the problem with Christians is that while smaller groups, secular groups, other religious groups are extremely well organized, although the Christian churches are very large by comparison, they're not well organized. Then the Christians are not mobilized, whether on this issue or on the many other issues that we are facing. And if they were, they would be a force to be reckoned with.
Bishop Michael, with regards to the Arab Spring, and you mentioned that earlier on in the interview, how do you see that progressing in the Middle East? What is your opinion with regards to it?
One of the things that Christians need to be aware of is that the Arab Spring, first of all, it was never a spring from the Christian point of view, but also from the point of view of many of the inhabitants of these countries. I mean, take Egypt, for instance. Secondly, it was not secular. Of course, secular people and groups participated in what happened in Egypt, for instance. But there was always the possibility, I was going to say danger, of radical Islamist groups dominating. When I first saw the demonstrations in Tahrir Square in Cairo, I was immediately reminded of Tehran in 1979, where again many secular groups, even the Communist Party of Iran, joined the mullahs in overthrowing the Shah, because that is the one thing they had in common, was the hatred of the Shah of Iran. As soon as the Shah had been overthrown, of course the Islamists, one by one, got rid of all of their enemies. In Egypt, in Tunisia, in Libya, this can also happen. So one of the things to say quite clearly about this is that democracy is not enough in the Middle East. The West has a love affair with democracy. And democracy is a good thing, but it's not enough because democracy can result simply in the tyranny of the majority. That's no less tyranny because it's of the majority. And what we need, for instance, in a place like Egypt is a Bill of Rights, which guarantees the equality of all before the law, which guarantees equal citizenship for people, hard won in a country like Egypt because, as you know, throughout the story of Islam, the non-Muslims have been treated as dhimmis, as subject peoples. And this citizenship was hard won. It's lasted about 100 years, and I'm sure that Christians and others in Egypt don't want to lose it and don't want to return to being dhimmis or subject peoples. So a Bill of Rights would certainly include that, some common view of citizenship, equality of all before the law, one law for all, whatever the religious law of different groups might be. only then could we say that the Arab Spring has had a positive result, and not until then.
We spoke before about how it's important to create awareness for the church to be aware of these issues. Would you like to comment very briefly on Shiite Islam?
Yes, Shiite Islam is quite different, or Shiite Islamism. I mean, obviously there are Shia Muslims for whom Shia Islam is a personal faith. I'm not talking about that, but Shiite Islamism as demonstrated, for example, in the revolution in Iran. Quite distinct from Sunni Islam, it works on the expectation of the coming Imam, the leader who is hidden,
Yes.
who will at some stage appear. And the question is, what will make him appear? What can facilitate his appearance? One of the things that can facilitate his appearance is martyrdom. I was in the area at the time of the Iran-Iraq war. You know, that's a war many people have forgotten, but it was a terrible war. A whole generation of young people on both sides were simply wiped out. They were used as cannon fodder. And as they went in Iran to their deaths, they were given a green key to wear. And this was the key to paradise. These young people, sometimes as young as 12. So the idea is that the more martyrs there are, the more the chance that the absent Imam will appear. Secondly, the absent Imam will is more likely to appear if the Shia idea of justice and belief in Shiism is promoted throughout the world. So, I mean, in terms of how people see it, not everyone, but many people in a country like Iran would say that the promotion of Iranian foreign policy and indeed military policy is directed to hasten the coming of the Imam. Now, this is quite a different way of thinking about things from Sunni Islamism, but nevertheless it is also very influential in its own circles. And one way to look at the situation in the Middle East is the coming conflict between Shia and Sunni. This is already the case in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, of course, now in Syria, in the Lebanon. And the conflict and its results may well define what Islam looks like in, say, 20 years' time.
Bishop Michael, so how should we react in the face of all of this?
We have to respond. I think the first thing is awareness, that we need to learn.
Yes.
First of all, that's very important. A Christian commitment to knowing about the world in which we live. Then, of course, we have to pray for the world in which we live, warts and all, and to pray in an informed way. That is what the learning is for, if you like. Thirdly, to support our brothers and sisters under pressure in so many parts of the world. I've just come back from northern Nigeria, where clearly an attempt is being made to wipe out Christians from a particular part of that country, at the very least, if not more than that. A month ago I was in Tanzania, and at 12 hours' notice I found myself preaching in a burnt-out church that had been burned down to the ground by Islamist extremists. Many people in this country simply don't know what is going on. Day by day, this is the daily experience of so many people. So awareness of what is going on, of prayer, giving in terms of money and time.
This can be to organisations like Open Doors.
Open Doors, Release International, Christian Solidarity Worldwide. There are so many organisations that work with persecuted Christians. And then, of course, visiting them. I mean, distant friendship, be warmed and well filled, is not enough. We must also, if we can be near these people and show our support and solidarity for them. Some of this is also because of what you might call self-interest. I mean, it's happening to them now. What will happen to us in the future? We can never discount this possibility that because of our faith we will suffer. I am familiar with the situation of the persecuted church in many parts of the world, and when I think about it, it always begins with discrimination and exclusion. Persecution begins with discrimination and exclusion.
Which is what is happening here in the UK.
Which is what is happening here, of course.
Yes,
so, we have a lot to learn from our brothers and sisters who have lived under persecution, who've been excluded by their wider society, who have suffered, who've been imprisoned, who've lost their jobs. And when these things begin to happen here, we shouldn't be surprised, we should be prepared.
We should be prepared. So it's not too late. Take up that armour, be prepared, and get involved.
Well, it's in some churches we have Advent, which is the preparation not only for Christmas but for the coming of the Lord.
Yes.
And I've been reading what Jesus has said in the Gospels about the coming of the Son of Man, and particularly struck by St. Luke's account of it. Where Jesus says, when all these things happen, this is not a time for depression or despair. But he says, lift up your heads because your redemption draws nigh. So Advent is a time of hope for us, even in these very difficult situations that our brothers and sisters face.
Well, this is your book, Triple Jeopardy for the West, and you can get this on Amazon. You can order it on Amazon, as well as any other good Christian bookstop, or any other bookshop for that matter. Thank you very much, Bishop Nazir-Ali. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you.